She wrote his heart in another woman's name. A lie can travel farther than a horse when it is carried by lonely hearts. In the high country of Montana, where pine trees leaned against the wind and snow stayed hidden in the shadows even in spring, Silas Boone lived alone in a cabin above Widow Creek. He was 36, broad-shouldered, quiet, and known by most folks as a mountain man who came down only for flour, coffee, lead, and salt. Some said he had chosen the mountains because he disliked people. Others said people had given him reason. Silas never corrected either story. He trapped through the cold months, fixed his own roof, stitched his own gloves, and spoke more to his old gray mule than to any living soul. His cabin sat where the trail thinned into stone and spruce, with one small window facing east. In the morning, when the sun touched that window, the whole room filled with pale gold for a few quiet minutes. Silas had built a shelf under it with his own hands, though he had nothing fine enough to place there. That empty shelf became important later, but the story did not begin in the mountains. It began 2 years earlier, far below the snow line, on a cattle ranch near the Musselshell River, where dust stayed on a person's boots no matter how often they were brushed. The ranch belonged to the Whitaker family, though everybody in the valley knew it was really held together by the elder daughter, Mae Whitaker. Mae was 27, strong in the saddle, plain in the way honest work can make a woman plain to foolish eyes, and sharper with numbers than any man who ever tried to cheat her father at market. She could mend a fence, calm a frightened horse, keep accounts, pull a calf through a bitter spring night, and still have coffee ready before sunrise. Men respected her when they needed her. They forgot she was a woman when they did not. Her younger sister, Lily Whitaker, was different in every way. Lily was 22, soft-haired, pretty, and bright as a ribbon in a dry town. She liked clean dresses, piano music, shop windows, and the sound of people admiring her. She was not cruel, but she lived as if the world had always made room for her because it mostly had. One hot August evening, while the family sat around the kitchen table, Lily read from a newspaper brought in from Miles City. She used a grand little voice as if every notice were written for a stage. Then she found the small advertisement. Mountain rancher and trapper, 36, steady habits, land and cabin in the Big Belt country, seeks letters from a woman of honest heart. Marriage intended if both are willing. S. Boone. Lily laughed so hard she nearly dropped the paper. "A mountain man looking for a bride in a newspaper," she said. "Can you imagine? He probably smells of smoke and bear grease." Their father chuckled into his cup. Their mother shook her head, but even she smiled. Mae did not laugh. She looked at the little notice longer than she meant to. There was something lonely in those few lines. Not desperate, not foolish, just plain. A man somewhere high above them had put his need into 3 careful sentences and sent it down into the world. Lily noticed me looking. "Oh, Mae," she said, teasing, "do not tell me you feel sorry for him." "I feel sorry for anyone who has to ask the newspaper for kindness," Mae said. That made Lily laugh again. Then she tilted her head, her eyes bright with mischief. "I should answer him." Their mother looked up. "You will do no such thing." "Not truly," Lily said. "Just for fun. I want to see what a mountain man writes. Me can make it sound proper." Mae's hand stilled near the coffee pot. "No," she said, but Lily had already slid paper across the table. "Please, Mae. You write all my thank you notes anyway. Just make it sound sweet and respectable. I will sign it." Mae should have pushed the paper back. Many times in later years she would remember that moment and wonder how such a small thing could become the gate to so much sorrow. The lamp was warm. The crickets were loud outside the open window. Her father was coughing a little, but not badly yet. Lily was smiling like a child asking for candy. It seemed like nothing. So Mae took up the pencil. She wrote in Lily's name. She said Lily was young, kind, fair in looks, and interested in hearing about the mountain country. She added a line about hoping his days were not too lonely. That line was Mae's, not Lily's. It slipped out before she could stop it. Lily never even read the whole letter. She signed her name with a careless loop. then went upstairs to try on a blue dress she planned to wear at church. Mae folded the letter, sealed it, and told herself it was harmless. A harmless thing should not weigh heavy in the hand. 3 weeks later, Silas Boone's reply arrived. Lily opened it at breakfast, expecting rough spelling and clumsy words. Instead, the kitchen grew quiet as Mae read it over her sister's shoulder. The handwriting was slow and uneven, but the words had a strange beauty because they were simple and true. He wrote that October in the mountains looked like God had set the world down to rest. He wrote about elk crossing a ridge at dawn, the smell of wet pine, the sound of snow sliding from branches, and the deep silence that came after dark when a man could hear his own thoughts too plainly. He did not try to be charming. That was what made the letter stay with me. Lily smiled for half a minute, said, "Well, that was sweeter than I expected," and left it beside the sugar bowl. Mae picked it up after supper. She only meant to read it once more. Outside, horses shifted in the corral. The wind pressed soft dust against the kitchen door. Her father coughed from the sitting room, a dry sound that made her look up with worry. By lamplight, Mae turned Silas Boone's letter over in her hands. A man alone in the mountains had asked a stranger what her days were like. And Mae, who had spent her whole life being needed but rarely known, felt something open in her chest that frightened her. That night, after everyone slept, she sat at the kitchen table and answered him. Not as Lily truly was, not fully as herself either. She wrote about the ranch at sunrise, about dust on her sleeves, about a stubborn mare that had finally trusted her hand, and about how some days a person could stand in a room full of family and still feel unseen. At the bottom, her hand trembled. Then she signed her sister's name. When the letter was gone with the morning post, Mae stood in the yard and watched the writer disappear down the road. She told herself it was the last one, but lies do not always begin with wickedness. Sometimes they begin with one lonely heart answering another before it has the courage to speak its own name. The second letter changed the shape of Mae Whitaker's days. Before it came, she rose before dawn because the ranch required it. After it came, she still rose before dawn, but now some secret part of her waited for the sound of hooves near the road, or the sight of a folded envelope tucked among the store bills and cattle notices. Silas Boone wrote the way a man walked through timber, careful, steady, and without wasting motion. He asked about the mare Mae had mentioned. He wanted to know if the animal still pulled back when touched near the left ear. He asked whether her father's cough came worse in the morning or at night. He asked why she had written that a person could be unseen in a room full of family. Mae read that question 3 times. Lily would have laughed at it. Their mother would have worried over it. Their father would have told Mae not to carry foolish thoughts when there was work to be done. So Mae did what she had done all her life. She carried the question alone. For 2 days she kept Silas's letter folded inside the ledger. Every time she opened the book to mark feed costs or count what was owed to the blacksmith, his words looked up at her from between numbers. Why unseen? It was such a small question, but no one had ever asked it that directly. On the 3rd night, after a long day moving cattle from the lower pasture, Mae sat at the kitchen table with sore hands and a smear of dust still across one cheek. The house was quiet. Lily had gone to bed early after complaining that the wind had ruined her hair. Their mother was asleep in a chair near the stove. Their father's cough came from the next room, rougher than it had been in summer. Mae dipped the pen. Then she told the truth. She wrote that she was the one people trusted with broken things. Broken fences, broken accounts, sick calves, tired horses, unpaid bills, and worries too heavy for the supper table. She wrote that being trusted was not the same as being seen. She wrote that some men had asked her to marry them, but each had spoken more fondly of her father's pasture than of her heart. When she finished, her throat hurt. At the bottom, she signed Lily's name. The shame of it sat beside her like another person in the room. Still, when she sealed the letter, she held it against her chest for a moment. The weeks that followed became a hidden road between the ranch and the mountains. Silas wrote about a storm that bent the pines until they looked like men praying. Mae wrote about a calf with white lashes that followed her everywhere until she named him Judge. Silas wrote about an old scar on his shoulder from a fall on frozen stone, and said the wound only troubled him before bad weather. Mae wrote that some wounds seemed to know storms before they arrived. He noticed everything she did not expect anyone to notice. If she mentioned a tired horse, he asked if the animal's left hoof had gone tender. If she wrote that her father had laughed at supper, Silas wrote back that laughter in a sick house was worth saving. If she said Lily had worn blue to a town dance, he only answered that blue suited mountain shadows better than ballrooms, and Mae smiled before remembering the compliment was not meant for her. That was when the lie first began to hurt. Not enough to stop her, only enough to make her careful. By winter, Lily had forgotten almost entirely that the mountain man existed. She had taken interest in a clerk named Warren Pike, a polished young man in Lewistown with clean nails and a hopeful future behind a store counter. Whenever a letter came addressed to Lily, she waved it toward me. "Your mountain friend has written again," she would say. "Your mountain friend," Mae would answer, trying to keep her voice light. Lily never heard the crack in it. Their mother noticed more. Mothers often did, even when they said little. One evening, while Mae kneaded bread dough with sleeves pushed to her elbows, her mother stood beside her and watched too quietly. "You write him often," she said. Mae pressed her palms into the dough. "Lily does not care to." "That was not what I said." Mae looked down at her hands. Flour clung to the rope, burns across her fingers. "It is only correspondence." Her mother's face softened, but worry stayed around her eyes. "Only is a small word people use when something has already grown large." Mae said nothing. A horse stamped outside. The kitchen window rattled in the wind. That night, Mae almost burned Silas's latest letter. She stood by the stove with the paper in her hand while flame cracked orange behind the iron door. She told herself it would be kinder. Let the thing end before it became too deep. Let Silas Boone think Lily Whitaker was pretty and careless and had lost interest, because that would pain him less than learning he had been writing his heart to a woman who did not even have the courage to sign her name. But then she looked down and read the last line again. "I do not know your face well, Miss Whitaker, but I know the sound of your courage on paper." Mae closed her eyes. No man had ever called her courage by name. She folded the letter and put it in the small drawer beneath the flour bin, where she kept needles, buttons, and things no one thought to look for. The photograph request came in March, when snow still sat high in the mountain passes and mud swallowed wagon wheels in the valley. Silas's letter was shorter than usual, but the carefulness in it made Mae's heart beat hard. He wrote that if it was not too bold, he would be grateful for a likeness. He had made a little place beneath the east window where morning light fell warm. He said it was foolish to want a face beside the letters, but he was old enough to own his foolishness. Mae sat with that letter until the lamp burned low. There was no honest way through it except confession. She could write one clean sentence. "Mr. Boone, the woman in the letters is not Lily. It is me, her sister. I have wronged you." The words formed in her mind with painful ease. Instead, at breakfast, Lily saw the letter and laughed. "A likeness. Oh, let him have one. I had mine made in the blue dress last month. Send that. He will be pleased." Mae stared at her sister. "You do not understand what he is asking." "He is asking for a picture, Mae, not a soul." But Mae knew better. Still, later that afternoon, she took Lily's photograph from the parlor mantel. In it, Lily looked beautiful, smooth, and untouched by weather. Her hands rested gently in her lap, pale and soft, with no scars from rope, no ink from ledgers, no roughness from winter work. Mae placed it beside her own hand and felt something inside her sink. Then she wrapped the photograph and sent it up the mountain. For days afterward, she moved through chores with a stone in her chest. She avoided the drawer beneath the flour bin. She avoided her mother's eyes. She avoided even looking toward the northern ridges when the sky cleared. When Silas's answer finally came, Mae opened it behind the barn where no one could see her face. He thanked Miss Whitaker for the likeness. He said it was finely made. Then, near the bottom, his words grew slower, as if each one had been set down with care. "The face is lovely, but I cannot find the woman from the letters in it. I expect a photograph can miss what a page catches. Me's hand tightened around the paper. The wind moved dry grass along the fence line. A loose hinge tapped softly against a post. Somewhere behind her, Lily laughed from the house, bright and easy. Me read the sentence again. He knew something was wrong. Maybe not the whole truth. Maybe only the shape of it. But high in the mountains, Silas Boone had looked at Lily's pretty face and missed me. After Silas wrote that a photograph could miss what a page catches, me stopped sleeping well. She still rose before dawn. She still counted cattle, checked water, wrote figures in the ledger, and kept the Whitaker ranch from slipping a little closer to ruin. But she moved with a secret bruise under her ribs. Every chore seemed to ask the same question. How long can a woman be known by her soul and still hide her name? Spring came to the mussel-shell country with wet wind and weak green grass. The calves grew bold in the pasture. Cottonwoods began to show silver buds along the river. Lily spent more time in town, where Warren Pike bought her lemon drops and walked her past the dressmaker's window as if the whole street had been built for courting. Me watched her sister come home smiling, cheeks pink from attention, and felt no anger toward her. That almost made the lie worse. Lily had not stolen Silas. She had not chased him. She barely remembered to ask whether he had written. The false name had become a coat Me had borrowed without permission and worn so long it had shaped itself around her. One evening, Me found Lily in the parlor holding a ribbon against her hair. "Does Warren like blue?" Lily asked. "I do not know. He said it made my eyes look brighter." Me looked down at the accounts in her lap. "Then wear blue." Lily studied her in the looking glass. "You sound tired." "I am tired." "You are always tired." Me almost smiled. "That is because everyone keeps handing me things." Lily turned then, softening. "Me, I know I ask too much sometimes." The kindness in her voice nearly undid me. For one wild second, she wanted to tell Lily everything. She wanted to say that the mountain man from the newspaper had become more real to her than any man who had ever sat at their table. She wanted to say that he wrote to the part of her nobody touched. She wanted to say that a photograph of Lily was sitting under his window while Me's heart lived in every page he kept. But their mother called from the kitchen and the moment passed. Me folded the ledger shut. "I will check the south fence before dark," she said. Outside, the wind was cold enough to sting. She walked to the barn, where the horses stood quiet in their stalls, warm breath rising in soft clouds. Her mare, Juniper, lifted her head and bumped Me's shoulder as if asking why she had brought sorrow into the barn again. Me leaned her forehead against the horse's neck. "I have made a mess of it," she whispered. Juniper only breathed. The next letter from Silas came folded around a pressed sprig of mountain sage. It had gone dry and silver in the paper, but when Me lifted it, the smell rose clean and sharp. He wrote of a late storm that had shut him inside for 3 days. He wrote of a fox that came near the cabin and stared through the snow as if judging his manners. Then, without warning, his tone changed. "I have been thinking about the woman in the photograph and the woman in the letters. I do not wish to be unkind, but I trust the letters more. A face can be arranged for a camera. A sentence written at midnight is harder to dress up." Me sat very still. The kitchen sounds went on around her. Her mother scraped a spoon along a bowl. Her father coughed by the stove. Lily hummed in the hall, but Me felt as if she had been set apart from all of them by one line of ink. Silas had not accused. That would have been easier. He had trusted the truest part of her while she was still lying to him. She carried that letter all day. By supper, she had decided she would confess in her next reply. Then the doctor came. He rode in from town near dusk, his horse lathered and his coat powdered with road dust. He had come to see Thomas Whitaker, whose cough had deepened into something that made the whole house listen between breaths. Me stood in the doorway while the doctor pressed an ear to her father's chest. Lily hovered near the stove, pale and frightened. Their mother gripped her apron so tightly her knuckles lost color. When the doctor finished, his face told me what his words tried to soften. "He needs warmer air for a while," he said. "At least through winter, maybe sooner. If he stays and works, he will not last." Me looked at her father. Thomas Whitaker gave a small, dry laugh. Warmer air costs money I do not have. No one spoke. The debts were not a mystery. Me knew every note, every overdue payment, every thin month ahead. The ranch had land and cattle, but cash was a shy creature there. It came late and left early. That night, me sat at the kitchen table after everyone had gone to bed. Her father's cough came from the bedroom like a saw cutting through cloth. She opened Silas's letter and tried to write the truth. "Dear Mr. Boone, my name is not Lily." She stared at the words until they blurred. Then her father coughed so hard that her mother woke and hurried to him. Me tore the page in half. She began again. This time she did not confess. She wrote as the woman Silas already knew, though not by name. She told him about the doctor. She told him about the money. She told him that she was afraid because the whole ranch leaned on her, and for once she did not know where to put her own weight. She hated herself for writing it. She needed to write it. Near the end, she added one sentence she almost crossed out. "Do not comfort me too gently, or I may break." When she signed Lily's name, tears slipped down her face and struck the paper. She dried them with her sleeve before the ink could run. 5 weeks passed before Silas answered. Those were the longest weeks of me's life. Her father weakened. Lily tried to help more, but even her efforts seemed unsure, like a town girl wearing borrowed boots. Their mother prayed under her breath while doing small chores. Me sold 3 young horses for less than they were worth and still could not make the numbers stretch far enough. Then, one gray morning, a package arrived at the Duck Creek store with me's name hidden nowhere on it. It was marked as a credit toward Thomas Whitaker's account. The storekeeper said it came from a fur sale owed from an old trade. Me knew the lie as soon as she saw it. Silas had sent pelts. His letter came with the account notice. He did not pity her. He did not offer soft words that would shame her pride. He wrote about snow because she had asked once for plain things. He wrote that 6 feet lay against his north wall. He wrote that a man could dig through winter one shovelful at a time if he did not stand there staring at the whole drift. Then at the bottom he wrote, "A wall that holds others must have something under it. Let this be a stone under yours. Between friends, help is not charity. It is freight carried both ways." Me lowered the letter to her lap. For the first time in months, she covered her face and cried without making a sound. The pelt money sent her father south before the next cold spell settled in. It bought medicine, travel, and a chance. Not a cure, but a chance. In the Whitaker house, everyone called it luck. Me did not. She knew a lonely man in the mountains had answered the most frightened letter of her life with dignity instead of pity. He had helped her family under another woman's name and protected her pride with a lie kinder than her own. That evening, me went to the barn with Silas's letter inside her coat. The sunset had gone copper over the pasture. Juniper stood at the rail, ears forward. Dust clung to me's skirt. Her hands were rough, tired, and trembling. "I love him," she said aloud. The words frightened a horse in the next stall. Me almost laughed, but the sound broke in her throat. She loved Silas Boone, not a dream of him, not the idea of a mountain man with a cabin under the pines. She loved the man who saw work in her words, pain under her courage, and worth where others only saw usefulness. And he did not know her name. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because the hardest truth has not reached the mountain yet. That night, me took out every letter Silas had sent. She spread them across her narrow bed in careful order. The room smelled of lamp oil, cotton, and rain coming in through the cracked window. One by one, she read them again, from the first awkward reply to the letter that had saved her father. By dawn, she understood something that left her cold. This was no longer a harmless mistake. It was love standing on a false floor, and sooner or later the floor would break. Silas Boone had a secret too, though it was not the kind that began with another person's name. His secret lived in the slow shape of his handwriting, in the careful spaces between his words, and in the way he had once carried the first letter down to Duck Creek trading post with his hat in both hands. When the first letter from Lily Whitaker arrived 2 years earlier, Silas had stood outside the trading post for nearly 10 minutes before going in. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat. His mule waited by the hitching rail, flicking its ears at passing flies. In his coat pocket was an envelope he had already opened and failed to read. He knew some words. A man could not trap, trade, and keep himself alive without reading some. He could make out flour, salt, powder, paid, owed, and his own name. He could follow numbers better than many men who laughed at his letters. But a full page written in a woman's careful hand was like a trail covered by fresh snow. He could see there was a path. He just could not find his footing. So he asked Mrs. Hattie Bell at the post to read it. Hattie was a round-faced widow with sharp eyes, soft hands, and a kindness that never made a man feel small for needing it. She had helped write the marriage notice after telling Silas more than once that a decent man should not let pride bury him before death had the chance. Silas had not wanted a wife because he was tired of washing his own shirts. He had wanted one because winter in the high country was long, and there were evenings when the silence in his cabin seemed to sit in a chair across from him. Hattie read the first letter aloud. The woman called herself Mae Whitaker. She said she was young, agreeable, and interested in hearing about the mountains. The words were polite and pretty enough, but when Hattie finished, Silas stood quiet. "Well?" Hattie asked. Silas looked toward the window. Outside, two boys were chasing each other through wagon ruts. A dog slept under a bench. She asked if my days are lonely, he said. Hattie smiled. Then answer that. So he did. He spoke slowly while Hattie wrote, trying not to sound like a fool. He told the stranger about October light on the ridges, about elk moving through fog, and about how a man could go 3 days without hearing a human voice and then find his own voice strange when he used it again. The second letter came, then the third. By the 9th, Silas no longer carried them to Hattie right away. He would sit on a bench outside the trading post and study the pages first, picking through familiar words: horse, father, wind, work, alone. It shamed him that he could not read the whole of them. But it was not only shame. The letters had changed. The woman in them no longer sounded like someone making conversation because manners required it. She wrote like a person opening a door in a house she had always kept locked. She told him about ranch work, about fear, about being useful until people forgot usefulness had a heart inside it. Silas could not bear hearing those words in Hattie's voice anymore. That winter, he took a primer home. Hattie gave it to him wrapped in brown paper, along with a stub of pencil and a slate used by her children years before. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," she said. Silas looked at the primer as if it weighed more than a rifle. "I am not ashamed of not knowing. I am ashamed of wanting to know too late." Hattie's face softened. "Wanting to learn is never too late, Mr. Boone." So high above Duck Creek, while snow sealed the trail and wind combed the pines, Silas Boone taught himself to read by lamplight. He traced letters with a rough finger. He copied words until his wrist ached. He sounded out sentences from the woman's letters, one by one, until they began to open. Some nights he learned only 3 lines before the flame burned low. Some nights he fell asleep with his head on the table and woke with ink on his sleeve. He did not quit. The Woman in the Letters had become the first book he ever truly wanted to finish. By spring, he could read her pages alone. Slowly, yes. With mistakes, yes. But alone. And when he wrote back without Hattie between them, the letters were shorter at first, then steadier, as if his hand was learning to walk beside his heart. He never told me all of this. Not then. He only wrote 1 line months later, after she had sent the desperate letter about her father's cough. "Whatever else happens in this world, your words taught a man his letters." Mae had read that line in the kitchen and pressed her fingers to her mouth, though she did not understand the full weight of it. She thought it was kindness. It was more than kindness. It was truth. By the second summer of their correspondence, the false name had become a thin wall they both stood beside without naming. Silas had Lily's photograph. He kept it for a while because returning it would have been cruel and keeping it felt like proof that he was trying to believe what he had been given. But he did not place it on the east shelf, not after the first week. Instead, he put it in a drawer beneath a stack of trade receipts. The shelf stayed empty. He knew something was wrong. No woman with those soft white hands had written about breaking ice from a trough until her knuckles split. No woman with that smooth, untouched face had described the exact loneliness of standing in a barn at midnight with a sick calf breathing against her skirt. The picture was pretty. The letters were alive. Still, he kept writing. Part of him feared the cruelest possibility, that some town beauty was using a plainer sister, cousin, or hired girl to answer a mountain man for amusement. He had heard stories like that. Men alone were easy to mock from warm parlors, but then came the letter about the father's cough. It was written near 2 in the morning. He knew that not because she told him, but because sorrow has a certain hour on paper. The words did not sit straight. They leaned as if the hand that wrote them had been tired past pride. She asked him not to comfort her gently. She asked him to tell her about the snow. Nobody wrote that kind of pain for sport. Silas sat at his table long after reading it. The lamp flame bent when wind pushed through a crack in the chinking. Outside, snow pressed against the cabin walls. His mule shifted in the lean-to. The world felt buried and breathless. By dawn, Silas had made his decision. He gathered the best pelts he had, packed them tight, and sent them down through Duck Creek with orders that the money go quietly toward Thomas Whitaker's account. He told Hattie Bell to make it look like settlement from an old trade. Hattie eyed him over her spectacles. "Is it Lily Whitaker you are helping?" she asked, "or the woman writing as Lily Whitaker?" Silas pulled on his gloves. "I reckon those may not be the same." Hattie said nothing for a moment, then she nodded once. "And if they are not?" Silas looked toward the mountain trail, pale in the morning cold. "Then I will keep faith with the truer one." Those words carried him through another year of letters. Me never knew that Silas had begun watching not only what she wrote, but what she hid. When she avoided speaking of the photograph, he noticed. When she described her sister's town dances as if viewing them from outside a window, he noticed. When she said "my father" instead of "our father," and then returned to safer wording in the next line, he noticed that too. A tracker learns from bent grass, broken twigs, and silence where a hoof should have struck. Silas tracked the truth across paper, but he did not force it. He had lived too much of his life cornered by hard men to corner another soul. If the woman behind the letters had a reason for hiding, he would wait until truth could stand without being dragged out. Still, waiting had a cost. Some nights he took Lily's photograph from the drawer and studied it by firelight, trying once more to join that face to the voice that had taught him to read. He could not do it. He would set the photograph down, open one of the letters instead, and find her there immediately. Not her face, her. One autumn evening, after the first frost silvered the grass around the cabin, Silas built a pine box with a glass front. He measured the wood twice, smoothed each edge, and set small brass hinges into the side. Inside, he placed the letters in bundles tied with clean cord. 50 spaces, though he did not yet have 50 letters. He did not know why he made room for that many. Maybe lonely hearts can count what is coming before the mind admits it. He hung the box beneath the east window. When morning came, gold light struck the glass and turned the pages warm. Silas stood before it with his coffee cooling in his hand. "Whoever you are," he said softly, "I know you better than your name." Far below, on the Whitaker ranch, Mae was folding another letter with Lily's signature at the bottom. And between the mountains and the river, a truth too heavy for paper was beginning to move toward them both. By the time the 50th letter left the Whitaker ranch, Mae had learned that love could be both a lantern and a wound. It lit the darkest parts of her life. It hurt whenever she looked too closely. She had never seen Silas Boone's face except through the small photograph he had sent the year before, taken outside Duck Creek trading post. The picture was not fine. He stood stiffly beside his mule, hat low, beard dark, eyes too serious for the camera. One hand rested on the mule's neck, not proudly, but with the easy touch of a man who was kinder to animals than to his own loneliness. Lily had glanced at it once and said, "He looks like he was carved out of a fence post." Mae had taken the picture back too quickly. To her, he looked like a man who had weathered much and lied about none of it. She kept the photograph hidden inside an old Bible on the shelf in her room. Not because she was pretending piety, but because no one in that house ever opened it except her mother on Sundays, and her mother's eyes had grown too tired for the small print. Some nights after the day's work was done, Me would sit on the edge of her narrow bed and look at Silas's photograph by lamplight. She would study the hard line of his mouth and wonder if it could soften. She would look at his hands and imagine them turning the pages she had sent. She would wonder if those hands had held Lily's picture and tried to love a face that did not belong to the heart inside the letters. Those thoughts punished her. Still, she wrote again. Summer returned dry and restless. Grass crisped early. Cattle pushed farther for water. The ranch hired one extra hand for haying, a young man named Amos Bell who admired me's skill with horses and made the mistake of saying so too loudly in front of her father. Thomas Whitaker, home from the warmer country but thinner than before, watched Amos follow me across the yard with his eyes. "That one likes you," he said one morning. Me was tightening a cinch. "He likes steady wages." "He likes more than that." She looked at her father. The sickness had carved hollows beneath his cheekbones, but his eyes remained sharp. "I have no time to be liked." Thomas leaned against the fence, breath shallow. "That is a sad thing for a young woman to say." Me pulled the cinch hard enough that Juniper flicked an ear in protest. "Young women who keep ranches alive do not get to speak like storybook girls." "No," he said, "but they still get to be loved." Me's hands went still. Her father had never spoken that way before. He was not a soft man, not because he lacked feeling, but because life had made him save words the way poor families saved flour. She looked away first. "I have chores," she said. Thomas let her go, but his words followed her all day. They still get to be loved. That evening she wrote to Silas about nothing serious. She wrote of hay dust, of a calf getting his head caught in a broken gate, of Lily learning to make custard and turning it into something closer to paste. She tried to be light. She tried to write as if love had not pressed a thumb into the center of her life. Silas answered with a letter that came wrapped in brown paper along with a small carved button made of antler. He said he had carved it during a storm because his hands needed work while his mind traveled south. "For your coat if it suits. If it does not, give it to someone who needs a button more than pride." Me held the little thing in her palm. It was plain, smooth, and carefully made. Not a jewel. Not a ribbon. Not a town gift meant to impress. Just a useful thing shaped by hands that thought of her in bad weather. She sewed it inside her riding coat where no one could see it. That was the first time she wore something of his. A month later, Warren Pike came to supper. Lily had spoken of him so often that the whole house seemed prepared for his arrival before he stepped through the door. He was neatly dressed, with polished boots and a smile that had practiced itself in shop windows. He brought flowers for Lily and a small paper sack of peppermint drops for Mrs. Whitaker. For me, he brought nothing but a polite nod. She did not mind. At supper, Warren talked of town matters, business hopes, new shipments, and a possible position opening at the county office. Lily shone beneath his attention. Their mother looked relieved. Thomas watched the young man with a careful eye. After the meal, while Lily and Warren sat in the parlor, Me went out to the porch with coffee. The night was mild. The stars hung low and bright over the open land. From inside came Lily's laugh, light as glass bells. Thomas joined me slowly, leaning on the doorframe. "She will marry him," he said. "Yes." "You sound certain." Lily was made for a lit window in town. "And you?" Me looked across the dark yard toward the barn. "I was made for whatever needs doing next." Her father turned his head. "That is not an answer." "It is the only one I have." For a while neither spoke. A horse shifted in the stable. Somewhere in the grass insects sang. Then Thomas said quietly, "Is there a man in those letters?" Me's cup jerked in her hand. Her father did not look at her directly. Perhaps that was kindness. Perhaps he knew she would run from the question if he faced her with it. "Lily's letters," Me said. "No," Thomas said. "I asked about yours." Me felt the porch boards beneath her boots, the cup warm in her palm, the night air cool against her face. She could deny it. She had denied smaller truths for 2 years, but her father had a way of waiting that made lies feel childish. "Yes," she whispered. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment as if he had been expecting that answer and dreading it. "Does he know?" Me shook her head. The old man's breath came rough, then steadied. Then one day you will have to choose whether you love him more than you fear losing him. Me's eyes burned. I already know I will lose him. You do not know that. I sent him Lily's photograph. Thomas looked at her then, and the sorrow in his face was harder to bear than anger. He thinks I am her, Me said. Or he thinks something near enough to that. I wrote the words, she wore the name. And what did he love? Her father asked. Me could not answer, not then. Inside, Lily laughed again, and Warren's voice followed softly. They sounded like a future arranging itself. Me stood on the porch beside her failing father and felt her own future waiting like a storm beyond the mountains. Weeks later, the proposal came. The envelope was thicker than usual. Me knew before she opened it that something had changed. Her hands trembled so badly she had to sit down by the kitchen window. Lily was in town. Her mother was mending upstairs. Thomas slept in the next room. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock. Me broke the seal. Silas's handwriting had grown steadier over the years, but this letter looked as if every word had been wrestled into place. He wrote that he was not rich, though the cabin was sound. He wrote that he had enough land for a small herd, enough timber for a better house, and enough loneliness to know he did not want to keep living alone. He wrote that if the woman behind the letters could bear the high country, he would ask her to come as his wife. Inside the letter was money for travel, lodging, and whatever dress she wished to wear, though he added that if she preferred boots to lace, he would count that wiser. Me pressed the paper against her mouth. The proposal was not to her. It was to Mae Whitaker. A sob rose in her chest, but she held it down until it became something harder. That evening, when Lily returned from town, Me placed the letter on the table. Lily read it standing up. Her smile faded line by line. "Oh," she said. Me waited. Lily sat slowly, the blue ribbon at her throat suddenly looking too bright for the room. "He wants to marry me." "No," Me said softly. "He wants to marry the woman who wrote him." Lily looked at her sister for a long time, really looked. For once there was no teasing in her face, no carelessness, no pretty little escape. "Me," she whispered, "you love him." Me turned toward the window because her face would not obey her. Lily rose and came around the table. "You do." "I have no right to." "That was not what I said." Me laughed once without joy. "You sound like Mama." Lily reached for the letter, then stopped before touching it again, as if it had become something sacred. "You have to tell him." Me shook her head. "I cannot." "You have to. He will hate me." "Maybe," Lily said, and the honesty of it made me flinch. "But he should hate the truth, not love a lie." The words struck like a hand to the heart. From the bedroom, Thomas coughed and woke. The whole house seemed to hold its breath. Me looked down at the travel money lying on the table. A road had opened before her, paid for by a man she had deceived and loved. It led not only to the mountains, but to judgment. "Before the next truth comes out, tell me what you would do. Would you ride to confess, even if it meant losing the only person who ever saw your heart?" Me did not sleep that night. Near dawn, she took the money, wrapped it in oilcloth, and placed it inside her coat. Then she went to the barn, saddled Juniper, and stood for a long while with her forehead against the mare's warm neck. The mountain trail waded north, and on that trail, every mile would carry her closer to Silas Boone's door. Morning came pale and cold over the Whitaker ranch, with a low line of clouds resting on the northern hills like a warning. Me had Juniper saddled before the first rooster called. She moved quietly, not because she meant to sneak away, but because some departures were too heavy for many words. The barn smelled of hay, leather, and old rain. Dust clung to the toes of her boots. Juniper shifted as Me tightened the cinch, then turned her head as if to study the woman beside her. "I know," Me whispered. "It is a hard road." The mare blew softly through her nose. Me tied a bedroll behind the saddle, then checked the oilcloth packet inside her coat. Silas's travel money was there, untouched. Beside it, folded smaller, was the first letter she had ever written him in Lily's name. She did not know why she carried that one. Maybe because every wrong road has a first step, and she meant to lay hers down before him. When she led Juniper out of the barn, her father was waiting by the corral fence. Thomas Whitaker wore his heavy coat over his nightshirt, boots half-laced, hair silver and rough from sleep. The sight of him there nearly broke her. He should have been in bed. He should not have spent his breath walking to the fence. "Papa," Mae said, "you ought not be out in this cold." "I am still your father," he said. "Cold has not changed that." She tried to smile and failed. He looked at the packed saddle, then at the shape of the oilcloth hidden beneath her coat. "You are going north." "Yes." "To him." Mae nodded. Thomas leaned one hand on the fence rail. His fingers looked thinner than they had a year ago, but his eyes held the same plain strength that had once made men step carefully around him at cattle sales. "Will you tell him all of it?" "I have to." "That is not what I asked." Mae swallowed. "Yes, I will tell him all of it." The old man nodded once. For a moment, they listened to the ranch waking. A hen scratched near the woodpile. Somewhere inside the house, a pan moved on the stove. Far off, a cow called for her calf. Thomas reached into his coat and pulled out his best slicker, the dark one he had worn through years of spring storms. He handed it over the fence. "Take this." "I have one." "Take this one." She held it against her arm and felt the weight of his care in the worn cloth. Her eyes burned. "I do not know if he will forgive me," she said. Thomas looked past her toward the land that had shaped them both. "Forgiveness is not a thing a person can demand. Truth is the only thing you can carry to his door. What he does with it belongs to him." Mae nodded, though the words hurt. Her father's gaze returned to her face. "But listen to me, girl. Whatever name you signed, you wrote the truth in those pages or you did not. If you did, the only false thing left is the name. Go set that right." That was the kindest thing he had ever said. Mae stepped close, and for the first time since she was small, she rested her forehead against his shoulder. Thomas lifted one thin hand and pressed it to the back of her head. "You were always more than this ranch knew how to thank," he whispered. Mae closed her eyes. From the porch, Lily appeared with a shawl around her shoulders. Her hair was loose, and her face looked younger without ribbons and smiles arranged around it. She came down the steps holding a small parcel. "I packed biscuits," Lily said, "and dried apples. Mama added coffee." Mae took the parcel. "Thank you." What? Lily's eyes filled, but she blinked quickly. "I should have stopped it sooner." "So should I." "I mean it, Mae." "So do I." For a moment both sisters stood in the cold yard with all their old habits between them. Lily, who had always been admired, Mae, who had always been needed. The lie had used them both, but not equally, and they both knew it. Lily stepped forward and hugged her. It was awkward at first. They were grown women who had lived too close and spoken too little. Then Mae let one arm come around her sister's back, and Lily held on hard. "If he is foolish enough to send you away," Lily whispered, "come home and I will say terrible things about him until you laugh." Mae gave a broken little smile. "You are better at terrible things than comfort." "I know. That is why I offered." They parted with tears neither named. Their mother stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She did not call me back. She only lifted one hand in blessing, then pressed that same hand to her mouth. Mae mounted Juniper before courage could leak out of her. The ranch yard looked different from the saddle, smaller somehow. The barn, the porch, the house with smoke rising from the chimney, the people she loved standing in the morning gray. She had spent her life holding that place together. Now she was riding away with the one truth that might tear her apart. She turned Juniper north. For the first mile, Mae cried. Not loudly, not helplessly, just steady tears that cooled on her cheeks while the mare walked the road she knew. Mae wiped them away with the back of her glove when the ranch disappeared behind a low rise. By the second mile, her chin lifted. By noon, the open grass had begun to roll toward rougher country. The wind sharpened. Sage brushed against Juniper's legs. Mae passed abandoned line shacks, dry creek beds, and cottonwood draws where leaves rattled like old paper. Every place seemed to echo with something Silas had once written. A ridge can look empty until you learn what lives by watching what moves least. He had written that after describing deer at dusk. Me looked at the quiet land and wondered if Silas had watched her letters the same way, waiting for what moved beneath the words. On the first night, she camped in a shallow draw beneath a leaning cottonwood. She built a small fire with dry twigs and warmed coffee in a tin cup blackened from years of use. Juniper grazed nearby, reins loose enough to show trust. The sky opened above them, wide and cold, stars scattered like salt. Me took out Silas's latest letter, the proposal, and read it again by firelight. If the woman behind the letters can bear the high country, I would ask her to come as my wife. The woman behind the letters. Her breath caught. Had he chosen those words by accident? Or had he known more than she dared hope? She folded the page carefully. "Do not hope," she told herself. "Hope will make the fall worse." But hope came anyway, small and stubborn as a green shoot through frost. The second day brought steeper land. The trail climbed through timber, crossed narrow streams, and wound along slopes where loose stone clicked under Juniper's hooves. Clouds gathered low. Once, Me saw fresh bear tracks pressed into mud near a creek and rode faster until the trees opened again. Rain began near evening. At first it was soft, barely more than a whisper on leaves. Then it thickened into cold gray sheets that soaked through Me's gloves and ran from her hat brim. She put on her father's slicker and felt, for a moment, as if his hand rested on her shoulder. By the third morning, she was deep in the Big Belt country. The world there was exactly as Silas had written it and nothing like she had imagined. The mountains did not rise politely. They shouldered up from the earth, dark with pine and stone, smelling of wet bark, cold water, and wild distance. The quiet was not empty. It was full of hidden life, watchful and old. Me was tired to the bone. Her hands ached from the reins. Her skirt was stiff with dried mud. Her hair had come loose beneath her hat. The biscuits were nearly gone. The oilcloth packet inside her coat felt heavier with every mile. Near midday, she met the mail carrier coming down the trail on a sturdy brown horse. He was a narrow-eyed older man named Jonah Bell, known through the high country for traveling in weather that kept wiser people indoors. "You lost, ma'am?" he asked. "No," Me said. "I am going to Mr. Boone's cabin." Jonah studied her face, then the mud on her coat, then the tired man. "You are the one who sent the note." Me's pulse jumped. Did he get it? "He got it." She waited, but the man said nothing more. "How did he take it?" she asked. Jonah shifted in his saddle, quietly. That was not comfort. Me's fingers tightened around the reins. Jonah looked north along the trail. "Rain will turn hard by sundown. His place is 4 hours if you do not lose the creek crossing. Keep left after the split pine." "Thank you." He started past, then paused beside her. "Mr. Boone came early for the mail these last 2 years, Jonah said. "Sometimes in snow, sometimes before I had even tied my horse. I do not know what lies between you and him, but I know he waited like a man waiting for medicine." Me could not speak. Jonah touched his hat and rode on. His words followed her up the mountain. A man waiting for medicine. By late afternoon, the rain returned with force. It struck the leaves, ran down her collar, and blurred the trail until the whole world became gray motion. Juniper lowered her head and climbed. Me's lips moved silently, practicing the sentence that had burned inside her for days. The letters were from me. Again. The letters were from me. Again. The letters were from me. 200 times, perhaps more. Still, when she saw the cabin at last, her courage nearly failed. It stood in a small clearing above a creek, built of dark logs with smoke rising from the chimney and warm light in one window, the east window. Beneath it, she saw the shape of a shelf. Me dismounted with stiff legs. Juniper blew hard, rain shining on her neck. Me tied her loosely near the lean-to, then stood facing the door. Everything in her wanted to turn back, but a lie had brought her this far. Only the truth could knock. Me climbed the step, lifted her trembling hand, and struck the door. Once, twice. Inside, a chair scraped. The door opened. Silas Boone stood before her, tall, dark-bearded, broad in the shoulders, wearing a faded wool shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. Firelight glowed behind him. His eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. For one breath, Mae forgot every word she had practiced. Then she saw, over his shoulder, the shelf beneath the east window. Lily's photograph was not there. In its place stood a glass-front pine box filled with letters tied in careful bundles. Mae's heart broke open. Rain poured from her hat brim. Her hand went to the oilcloth packet inside her coat. "The letters," she said, her voice shaking, "were from me." For a moment, Silas Boone did not move. Rain beat hard against the cabin roof. It ran from Mae's hat brim down the sides of her face and onto the worn boards beneath her boots. Her coat clung dark and heavy to her shoulders. One hand stayed pressed against the oilcloth packet hidden over her heart, as if she could keep herself from coming apart by holding the truth in place. "The letters were from me," she said again, softer this time. Silas's eyes did not leave her face. Mae had imagined anger. She had imagined the door closing. She had imagined his mouth tightening with disgust as he looked past her plain, wet face and saw the ruin of every page she had written. But he only stepped back. "Come in out of the rain, Miss Whitaker." The name struck her strangely. Not Lily, not me. Just Miss Whitaker, as if he was giving the truth room to decide where it would stand. Mae crossed the threshold with stiff legs. Warmth from the fire touched her chilled hands and made them ache. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, coffee, pine, and clean wool drying near the hearth. It was smaller than she had imagined, but sturdier. A narrow bed stood against one wall, covered with a patched quilt. A rifle rested above the door. A pot hung over the fire. On the table lay a half-carved piece of wood, a knife, and a folded letter she recognized as her own. The last one. Her unsigned note. Silas closed the door behind her, shutting out the worst of the rain. For several breaths, neither spoke. Mae looked again toward the east window. The glass-front box beneath it caught the firelight. Inside were her letters, tied into careful bundles with cord. The sight wounded her more deeply than Lily's photograph ever could have. Those pages had been treated not as a game, not as foolishness, but as something worth keeping safe. "I brought your money back," Mae said quickly, because silence was too dangerous. She fumbled inside her coat and drew out the oilcloth packet. Her fingers were clumsy from cold. "Every dollar. I did not spend it. I should never have let you send it. I should never have let any of this go on." She set the packet on the table. Silas looked at it but did not touch it. Mae's breath came unevenly. "My sister never wrote you. Not once. The first letter was meant as a joke, a foolish thing. She asked me to make it sound proper, and I did. Then you answered and she lost interest, but I kept writing." Her voice broke on the last words. She forced herself onward. "I signed Lily's name because the first letter had already gone that way. Then because I was a coward. Then because I could not bear to lose the letters. That is the truth of it. There is no better reason hiding under it." Silas stood near the table, firelight cutting shadows across his face. He was not as still as he seemed. Mae noticed the tension in his jaw, the way one hand rested against the back of a chair, fingers pressing into the wood. He was hurt. Of course he was hurt. She lowered her eyes. "The photograph was Lily. I sent it when you asked because I was ashamed of my own face and afraid of my own name. You deserved honesty long before now. I am sorry. I am sorrier than words can hold." The cabin was quiet except for the rain and the fire. At last Silas spoke. "When did she stop caring?" The question startled me. "Lily." He nodded. "After your first reply," Mae said. "Maybe before that. She never meant harm. She was silly and careless, but she did not understand what the letters became." "And you did." Mae's face burned. "Not soon enough." Silas looked toward the box of letters. His expression shifted, not softening exactly, but changing shape around a pain he was trying to hold steady. "You wrote about the mare with the tender ear." "Yes." "The calf you named Judge." "Yes." "Your father's cough." Mae swallowed. "Yes." "The night you wrote that you were tired of being the wall." Tears stung her eyes. "Yes." Silas turned back to her. Then I have known you a long while, Mae Whitaker. Her name and his voice nearly brought her to her knees. You knew, she whispered. I knew Lily's picture did not belong to the letters. That is not the same. No, he said, it is not. The honesty of that answer hurt, but it was fair. He went to the hearth and poured coffee from the pot into a tin cup. His movements were slow, almost too careful. He set the cup on the table near her. Drink, you are shaking. I am not here for kindness. You are wet and cold in my cabin. You will drink. There was no romance in the command. No softness meant to soothe her guilt, just plain sense. That made her obey more quickly than tenderness might have. Mae wrapped both hands around the cup. Heat moved into her fingers with a dull pain. She did not sit until Silas nodded toward the chair. Even then she sat on the edge, ready to rise if he told her to go. Silas remained standing. I nearly stopped writing after the photograph, he said. Mae closed her eyes. I thought maybe a pretty girl in a warm house had found amusement in a lonely fool. I thought maybe my letters were being passed around a parlor. No, Mae said at once, looking up. Never, I never showed them to anyone, I swear that. I believe you. His words came quickly enough to quiet her, but not enough to ease the ache. What changed your mind? She asked. Your 19th letter. Mae knew it before he explained. Her father, the doctor, the winter, the night she had written with fear laid bare on the page. Silas's gaze held hers. No one mocks a man with that kind of pain, he said. No one writes from that place unless her hand is already in the fire. After that I did not know your name, but I knew the letters were true. Mae stared at him through tears. You should have asked. You should have signed. The words landed between them like a stone set gently on a table. Heavy, plain, and impossible to argue with. Mae nodded. Yes. Silas finally pulled out the chair across from her and sat. He looked tired now, not in his body but in some deeper place. It made him seem less like the mountain itself and more like a man who had spent 2 years waiting beside an unanswered question. When I sent the proposal, he said, I wrote to the woman behind the letters. I chose those words careful. Mae's heart gave one hard beat. I wondered. I know you did. Then why send it to Lily's name? Because it was the only name you had given me. Mae looked down at the coffee. Shame moved through her again, but quieter now, not less painful, only more honest. I thought if I came, she said, you would hate me. Silas leaned back, eyes on the fire. I have been angry with you since you stepped in. Mae flinched. But hate is a clean thing, he continued. This is not clean. Outside, thunder rolled far off across the peaks. The cabin window trembled faintly. Mae held the cup tighter. I can leave when the rain eases. Silas looked at her then, and the pain in his face deepened. Is that what you came for? To throw truth through my door and run before it could answer? No. What did you come for? Mae could have said forgiveness. She could have said mercy. She could have said to return the money. All those things were true, but none were the center. She placed the cup down with both hands. I came because you deserve to look at the woman who wronged you. And because if there is any part of you that cared for the words, I wanted you to know whose heart was inside them before you buried them. Silas's face changed then, only a little. His eyes dropped to her hands resting on the table. They were red from cold, rough across the knuckles, marked with old rope scars and ink near the thumb. Not Lily's hands, not soft hands made for parlor photographs. Mae fought the urge to hide them in her lap. Silas reached across the table slowly, giving her time to pull away. She did not. He turned her right hand palm up. His touch was warm, calloused, careful. He studied the scars as if reading a map he had waited years to see. There is Judge's birth, he said quietly, touching a pale line near her wrist. Mae's breath caught. There is the ledger, he said, brushing the ink stain by her thumb. There is the wind. A tear slipped down her cheek. I am not pretty like Lily. Silas looked up, and for the first time since she entered, something fierce moved through his sorrow. I did not teach myself to read for a photograph. Me went still. He seemed to realize what he had revealed. His hand tightened around hers for one brief moment before he let go. You taught yourself, she whispered. Silas looked toward the fire. The first letters Mrs. Bell read to me at the post. I knew some words, not enough. After a while, I could not bear another voice between me and yours, so I learned. Me covered her mouth. The room blurred. All this time she had feared her letters were stolen from him by a false name. She had not known they had given him something too, not just companionship, not just love. They had opened the written world beneath his hands. I did not know, she said. No. If I had known, I would have told you sooner. Silas's mouth moved almost like a sad smile. Maybe, maybe not. That was fair too. The rain softened outside, turning from a hard roar to a steady whisper. The fire settled with a low crack. In that small cabin above Widow Creek, everything seemed to pause at the edge of what could not be undone. Me wiped her cheek with the heel of her hand. What happens now? She asked. Silas did not answer at once. He rose and walked to the east window. He opened the glass front box and took out one bundle of letters. He held them for a long moment, then placed them on the table between them. These are mine to keep or burn, he said. Me's chest tightened. Yes. His hand rested on the bundle. And that money is yours to carry back or leave. Yes. He looked at her, steady and wounded. But the next words spoken between us need no borrowed name. Me nodded, trembling. Silas took a blank sheet from the shelf and laid it before her. Beside it he placed a pencil. Write one line, he said. Her voice was small. What line? The first true one. Me stared at the paper. Then slowly, with a hand that shook so hard the pencil scratched, she wrote, My name is Mae Whitaker, and I loved you before I was brave enough to tell the truth. Silas read it. His face gave nothing away. Then from outside, Juniper let out a sharp, frightened cry. Silas turned at once toward the door. A second later, another sound came through the thinning rain. Hooves, more than one horse, coming fast up the mountain trail. Silas moved before me could rise. He crossed the cabin in 3 long steps and lifted the rifle from above the door. There was no wildness in him, no show of anger, only the calm speed of a man who had lived too long where hesitation could cost blood or shelter. Me stood so quickly the chair scraped behind her. Who would come here in this rain? She asked. Silas held up one hand. They listened. Hooves struck wet earth outside. A horse blew hard. Men's voices cut through the rain, low and rough, too near the linta where Juniper was tied. The mare cried again, not in pain but in fear. Silas's jaw tightened. Stay behind me, he said. Me did not argue. He opened the door only wide enough to look out. Gray light and wet wind swept into the cabin. Me saw shapes beyond him, 3 riders in slickers, their horses mud-spattered and restless beneath the pines. One man had already dismounted. He stood near Juniper with a hand on her bridle. Silas stepped onto the porch with the rifle pointed down but ready. Take your hand off that mare. The man turned, smiling beneath a dripping hat brim. Me's heart dropped. Amos, she whispered. Silas heard her. His eyes did not leave the man outside. Amos Bell, the hired hand from the Whitaker ranch, looked rougher than he had in summer. His coat was torn at one sleeve. His face was thin, and the polite admiration he once gave me had hardened into something meaner. Behind him sat 2 men me did not know. One was older, with a red scarf at his throat. The other had a narrow face and restless hands. None of them looked surprised to find her there. Well now, Amos called. I reckon you would make it this far if that stubborn mare held up. Me stepped into the doorway beside Silas despite his warning. What are you doing here? Amos gave her a look that made her skin crawl. Following what I am owed. You are owed nothing. That is not how I see it. Rain ran from the cabin roof in silver ropes. Silas stood still, broad in the doorway, one hand on the rifle. Say your business and leave. Amos laughed once. My business is with Miss Whitaker. Then speak plain, Silas said. Amos's smile faded. Me knew suddenly that he had not come only out of jealousy. Jealous men made noise in town or drank too much at the corral. This was different, this had purpose. "You took money north," Amos said to me. "I saw you pack it." Me's hand moved unconsciously to the oilcloth packet on the table behind her. Silas noticed. "So that is it," Me said. "You followed me for money." "For money," Amos said, "and for sense. Your family is drowning in debt, and you ride off to throw cash back at some half-wild mountain man." Silas's expression did not change, but Me saw his fingers tighten around the rifle stock. Amos looked past Silas into the cabin, trying to see the table. "That money can save the ranch." "It is not ours," Me said. "It was sent to Lily Whitaker, was it not?" The name hung in the rain. Me felt Silas go still beside her. Amos smiled because he knew he had struck something. "Oh, I know enough," he said. "He sent marriage money to the pretty sister, and you carried it off like it belonged in your pocket. Folks might call that theft if the tale is told right." Me's stomach turned cold. "You know nothing about it." "I know what people will believe." That was the real threat. Not the men, not the horses, not even the money. It was the story Amos could carry back down the mountain. A crooked story, polished just enough to ruin her and hurt Silas too. Silas stepped forward one pace. The riders shifted in their saddles. "You will not threaten her at my door," Silas said. Amos looked at him with open dislike. "Your door? You are the fool in this, Boone. She wrote you under another woman's name, took your help, took your proposal. Now she comes crying up the mountain and you stand here like a dog grateful for the kick." Me flinched as if he had slapped her. Silas did not move, but something in his silence changed. It grew colder. "You will leave," he said. The older rider with the red scarf cleared his throat. "We did not climb all this way for nothing. Hand over the travel money and we go." Me stepped fully onto the porch. "No." Silas looked at her. "Me." "No," she repeated louder now, though her voice shook. "I have lied enough because I was afraid. I will not let him turn this into another lie." Amos's eyes narrowed. Me's wet skirt clung to her boots. Her hands trembled, but she lifted her chin the way her father had taught her at cattle sales when a man tried to cheat them by smiling. "That money belongs to Mr. Boone unless he chooses otherwise. My family's debts do not make wrong right. My shame does not make theft honest. If you came here thinking I would be too frightened to say that in front of him, you wasted a hard ride." For the first time, Amos looked uncertain. Silas glanced at me, and in that brief look she saw something that pierced deeper than forgiveness. Respect. Not soft, not simple, but real. Amos spat into the mud. Fine words from a woman who signs another name. Me took the blow. She did not look away. "Yes," she said, "I did that, and I came here to answer for it. I will not answer to you." The narrow-faced rider muttered, "This is taking too long." He swung down from his horse and started toward the porch. Silas raised the rifle then, not wildly, not high with anger, just enough. "That is far enough." The man stopped. The rain seemed louder. Me could hear Juniper breathing hard under the lean-to. The mare pulled once at the tie rope and Amos still stood too close to her. Then a voice rang from the trail behind the riders. "Best listen to him." Everyone turned. Jonah Bell, the mail carrier, rode into the clearing with a shotgun across his saddle and a grim look beneath his soaked hat. Beside him came Mrs. Hattie Bell from the Duck Creek post, wrapped in a dark slicker, sitting her horse with the steady courage of a woman who had buried a husband, raised children, and feared very little that walked on two legs. Me stared in disbelief. Hattie called out, "Amos Bell, I told your aunt there was meanness in you, and I dislike being proven right." Amos went pale under the rain. "Aunt Hattie, this is none of your concern. When a man drags my family name up a mountain to rob people under cover of righteousness, it becomes my concern." The older rider cursed softly. Jonah's shotgun did not move. "You three can ride down with me now or wait here for the deputy from Duck Creek. I passed him an hour back. He is slow, but he is coming." Me did not know whether that was true. From the look on Jonah's face, neither did Amos, but the two riders with him believed enough. The older man backed his horse. The narrow-faced one took 2 careful steps away from the porch and lifted both hands. Amos looked at me one last time, anger and humiliation burning in his eyes. "You think this makes you clean?" he said. Me's answer came quietly. "No, but it keeps me from getting dirtier." Silas looked at her again. This time the pain in his face had shifted. Not gone, perhaps it would never be gone fully, but it no longer stood alone. Jonah rode forward. "Mount up, boys." There was no fight, only bitter looks, muttered words, and the hard sound of horses turning in mud. Amos climbed into the saddle with a jerk of the reins. Before following the others, he glared at Silas. "She will bring trouble to any man who takes her." Silas's voice was low. "A man who fears truth calls it trouble." Amos rode off. The clearing slowly emptied, leaving only rain, churned mud, and the shaken breath of the horses. Jonah watched the 3 men disappear down the trail before lowering the shotgun. Hattie dismounted with Jonah's help and marched toward the porch, skirts wet at the hem. "Well," she said, looking from Silas to me, then to the open cabin door behind them. "Seems I have arrived at a private moment after it became public." Despite everything, me almost laughed. Then she saw Hattie's face soften as her eyes moved to the glass front box beneath the east window. "So," Hattie said quietly, "the letter woman came." Silas lowered the rifle. Me looked at him. "You told her?" "She wrote my first replies," Silas said. Hattie lifted one brow. "And then he got too proud and too smitten to let me keep reading them." Silas gave her a look. "That was not pride." "No," Hattie said, smiling sadly. "I suppose it was not." The words settled around me with fresh understanding. Hattie Bell had known parts of this story before me had even dared own her part in it. The woman had read the first false letter, written Silas's first answer, and watched him teach himself by the fire of someone else's hidden heart. Me felt suddenly exposed before her. "I wronged him," she said. Hattie looked at her for a long moment. "Yes, you did." Me lowered her eyes, then Hattie stepped closer. "But you rode through 3 days of weather to say it with your own face. That does not erase the wrong, child. It tells me what kind of woman is standing after it." Me swallowed hard. Jonah went to see to the horses. Hattie entered the cabin without waiting for an invitation, as older women with moral authority often do. Silas followed, then me. Inside, the warmth felt different now. The room held more people, more history, more truth than it had an hour before. Hattie removed her gloves and stood before the box of letters. "50, she said. "50, Silas answered. "And the photograph?" "In a drawer." Hattie nodded, as if that settled something she had wondered for a long time. Me stood near the table, where her first true sentence still lay on the blank page. "My name is Mae Whitaker, and I loved you before I was brave enough to tell the truth." Hattie read it silently. Then she looked at Silas. "What will you do with that?" Silas did not answer. Me's heart tightened. Hattie did not press him. She only put her gloves back on and turned toward me. "If you believe one act of courage can change the shape of a life, stay with this story a little longer, because love on the frontier was never proved by pretty words alone." Me glanced at Silas, unsure whether the line was meant for her, for him, or for every lonely heart that had ever needed more time than pride allowed. The rain eased near dusk. Jonah and Hattie left after taking coffee, promising to make sure Amos and his companions reached Duck Creek with the deputy close enough behind to discourage more foolishness. Hattie pressed me's hand before mounting. "Truth is a hard door," she said, "but you knocked." When they were gone, the cabin became quiet again. Me stood by the table, exhausted beyond tears. "I should go," she said. Silas looked toward the darkening window. "The trail is mud and night. You will not ride it now." "I can sleep in the lean-to." "No." "Silas." He turned at the sound of his name in her true voice. The air changed. Me felt it. He felt it too. "You can take the bed," he said. "I will sleep by the fire." I did not come to take more from you. You are not taking, I am offering shelter. What? She looked at the letters in the box. Why? Silas was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up the page with her true sentence and folded it once. Because today, he said, when a mean man offered you an easier lie, you chose the harder truth. Mae's breath caught. That does not make what I did right. No. Does it make you hate me less? Silas looked at the folded page in his hand. I do not know what it makes yet. The answer hurt, but it also held something alive. Mae nodded. Outside, the last rain fell from the roof in slow drops. Inside, Silas opened the glass front box and placed her true sentence beside the 50 letters, not tied with them, not hidden under them, but set apart where morning light would find it. Mae watched him do it with one hand pressed over her heart, and for the first time since she had knocked on his door, she allowed herself to wonder whether the truth had not ended the story, but begun the only part that could be real. Morning came soft over Widow Creek, as if the storm had spent all its anger in the night and left the world washed clean. Mae woke before the sun reached the window. For one confused moment, she did not know where she was. The quilt over her was heavy and warm. The cabin smelled of ashes, pine boards, and coffee beginning to heat on the stove. Rainwater dripped somewhere outside in slow, patient drops. Then she remembered. Silas's cabin, the confession, Amos at the door. Her first true sentence placed in the letter box. Mae sat up quickly. Across the room, Silas was not by the fire. His blanket lay folded on the floorboards where he had slept, if he had slept at all. The bed had been given to her without argument, but not without distance. That distance had filled the cabin through the night, quiet as another wall. Mae smoothed her hair with both hands and looked toward the east window. The first sunlight had just touched the glass front box. Inside were the 50 letters tied in careful bundles. Beside them, set apart like a fresh wound and a new beginning, lay the line she had written the night before. My name is Mae Whitaker, and I loved you before I was brave enough to tell the truth. Seeing it in morning light made her chest tighten. It looked smaller than it had felt when she wrote it. Just one line on paper. Yet it had cost her nearly everything to place those words where the false name could no longer hide. The cabin door opened. Silas stepped in carrying a small stack of split wood. Cold air came with him. His hat was damp around the brim and his beard held tiny drops from the trees. He paused when he saw she was awake. Coffee is near ready, he said. Thank you. The words sounded too polite for people who had carried 2 years of each other's hearts through the mail. Silas set the wood by the stove and busied himself with the pot. Mae rose and folded the quilt carefully, then looked around for her boots. He had placed them near the hearth. They were dry. Her coat hung on a peg brushed clean of mud. Her father's slicker was spread over a chair. Every small kindness made her ache. You cleaned my boots, she said. They were wet. That was all. Mae almost smiled, then did not. She understood this kind of man. He could be gentle with his hands while keeping his heart locked behind his teeth. They drank coffee at the table in silence. Outside, Juniper nickered from the lean-to. Silas's mule answered with a cranky sound that made Mae glance toward the door. For a moment, the ordinary life of the place showed itself. Animals waiting for feed, wood needing stacked, ashes needing carried, a creek running cold below the cabin. Love had not made the morning grand. It had made every plain thing harder to look at. Silas pushed back his chair. I will ride you down to Duck Creek after breakfast. Mae's fingers tightened around the cup. The words were not cruel. That almost made them worse. You want me gone, she said. Silas looked toward the window. I think you should not travel alone after yesterday. That is not what I asked. His jaw worked once. No, he said at last, I do not want you gone. Mae's breath caught. But wanting and trusting are not the same thing, he said. She lowered her eyes. I know. He stood there with his hands resting on the chair back, the morning light cutting across his shoulder. I have read your letters so many times I could hear your voice before I knew your face, he said. Last night, your face stood in my doorway and told me the name was false. I believe the pain in you. I believe the courage it took to come. But some part of me is still back at that table 2 years ago, receiving a letter from a woman who did not exist. Me nodded slowly. Then let that part of you be angry. Silas looked at her. I do not ask you to hurry past it, she said. I do not ask you to make my confession into a reward. If you take me to Duck Creek, I will go home from there. If you never write again, I will deserve the silence. But I need you to know one thing before I leave. He did not speak. Me rose from the table, though her knees felt weak. I did not love you because I was lonely for any man. I loved you because you saw me where I stood. You saw the work, the fear, the pride, the tiredness, and the part of me that still wanted tenderness, though I had buried it deep. I signed the wrong name, but I never wrote you a false heart. Silas's eyes darkened. The fire snapped softly behind him. Me reached inside her skirt pocket and drew out the first letter she had ever sent. The paper was worn at the fold from the journey, but still held together. This was the beginning, she said. I brought it because I thought you should know exactly where the wrong started. She placed it on the table. Silas looked down at it but did not touch it. Me's voice grew quieter. Burn it if you want. Burn all of them if you must. They are yours. Silas stared at the first letter for a long time. Then he picked it up. Me braced herself for the stove door opening, for the flame taking that first false page. Instead, he unfolded it and read. His eyes moved slowly over the words. She could see the effort still, not because he could not read, but because Silas never hurried with something that mattered. When he finished, he looked at the bottom, Mae Whitaker. The name sat there bright with old dishonesty. Silas reached for the pencil near the shelf. What are you doing? Me whispered. He laid the letter flat, drew one line through Lily's name, and wrote beneath it in his careful hand. Mae Whitaker wrote this. Then he set the pencil down. Me covered her mouth. It does not erase it, he said. No. But it tells the record where to start telling the truth. Her eyes filled so fast she had to turn away. Silas folded the letter again and placed it beside her true sentence in the glass front box. After that, something changed in the room. Not enough to heal, not enough to promise, but enough for both of them to breathe differently. They ate breakfast standing near the stove because neither seemed able to sit again. Silas fried trout from the creek with cornmeal and salt. Me sliced biscuits Lily had packed, though they were damp around the edges. When Silas tasted one, he paused. Your sister made these. Likely. They are hard as hinges. Me blinked, then laughed. It came out sudden and unsteady, half surprise, half grief. Silas looked at her, and for the first time since she had arrived, the corner of his mouth moved. Only a little, but it was enough to feel like sun touching frozen ground. She is better with ribbons than flour, Me said. I gathered. The tiny warmth faded, but not completely. After breakfast, Silas went outside to saddle the horses. Me cleaned the pan without asking. She knew the small acts of a house, and her hands found them naturally. She poured wash water, wiped the table, shook crumbs into her palm, and set the cups upside down to dry. When Silas came back, he stopped in the doorway and watched her. Me grew still. I should not have presumed. No, he said. I was only thinking that I knew how you moved before I saw you move. Her heart gave a painful little twist. He looked away first. They rode down from Widow Creek near mid-morning. Silas led the way on a dark bay gelding, with me following on Juniper. The trail shone with wet stones. Sunlight broke through clouds in strips, turning the pines bright at their edges. Water ran along the ruts. Far below, mist lifted from the valley. For a long while they spoke little. Me studied the country Silas had described in his letters. The split pine near the lower crossing. The shale slope where deer tracks pressed into mud. The creek bend where he had once watched a fox steal bait from a trap and look proud of it. Each place was familiar and new at once. You made it sound lonely, she said after they crossed a shallow stream. It is. But beautiful. That too. She looked at his back, broad beneath the coat. Which one did you feel most? Silas slowed his horse until they rode side by side. Before the letters, he asked, yes. Lonely. And after? He kept his gaze on the trail, beautiful more often. Me turned away before he could see what that did to her face. Near midday, they reached a high clearing where the trail opened toward the valley. The mussel shell country lay far beyond sight, but me knew it waded past the folds of land and river bends. Home, debt, family, consequences, perhaps whispers if Amos found breath enough to make them. Perhaps shame at every counter where Lily's name had been used and me's hand had hidden behind it. Silas stopped his horse. Me drew up beside him. "Duck Creek is 3 hours from here," he said. She nodded. He looked out across the ridges. "If I take you there, Hattie will see you get lodging. Jonah can guide you lower tomorrow." "I understand." But he did not move. Wind brushed through the clearing, carrying the clean smell of wet sage. Me waited. Silas took off his hat and rested it on his saddle horn. His hair was dark and rough from the weather. Without the hat, he looked younger somehow, more vulnerable, less mountain, more man. "I have thought of marrying the woman in those letters for near a year," he said. Me's hands tightened on the reins. "I know. I built a bigger shelf because I thought she might bring books." Me stared at him. "I cut extra firewood last month because I thought she might get cold." Her throat closed. "I mended the east room roof because I thought if she came, she should not hear dripping all night." He looked at her then, and the hurt in his eyes stood beside something deeper. "I was making room for you before I knew whether you would ever be brave enough to arrive." Me could not speak. Silas turned the hat slowly in his hands. "Last night I was angry that the woman I waited for came wearing the truth too late. This morning I keep asking myself what I am to do with the fact that she came at all." Me whispered, "What do you want to do?" He looked toward the valley, then back to her. "I want time that is not stolen." The words settled between them, simple and enormous. Me nodded. "Then take it. I want letters with your name. I will write them. I want to know your face without comparing it to my hurt." Me's eyes filled again. "I can give you time for that too." Silas studied her, as if testing whether the promise could bear weight. Then hoofbeats sounded from the trail below. Both of them turned. This time the rider was alone. Jonah Bell came up the slope, his horse blowing hard. His face was grave and his hat was pushed back as if he had ridden faster than wisdom liked. Me's stomach tightened. "Miss Whitaker," Jonah called. Silas guided his horse forward. "What is it?" Jonah looked from Silas to me, then removed his hat. "Message from Duck Creek. Came through just after dawn." Me felt the world tilt before he spoke the rest. "It is your father," Jonah said gently. "He has taken a bad turn." The clearing blurred. Me's hand went to Juniper's mane. Jonah's voice lowered. "Your family asks you to come home as quick as you can." Silas turned to her at once. Every unfinished thing between them stood there on the ridge. Anger, love, trust, time, the road to Duck Creek, the road back home. Me tried to breathe. "I have to go," she said. Silas nodded, already gathering his reins. "I know." She looked at him, terrified that this was how the story would leave them, not with a choice, but with distance forced between the wounds. "I do not know when I can write." Silas's face held steady, but his eyes did not. "Then do not write first," he said. "Ride." Me blinked. He swung his horse around toward the lower trail, not away from her but beside her. "I am coming with you." Silas Boone rode beside Mae Whitaker, as if the whole mountain had decided to move with her. They did not waste time on careful words. There would be time for words later if life gave them that mercy. For now, there was only the trail, the wet stones, the hard pull of the horses, and the fear sitting cold between Me's ribs. Her father had taken a bad turn. The message rang in her mind with every hoofbeat. Jonah Bell led them down the first steep miles, then turned toward Duck Creek to send word ahead and make sure Amos Bell's trouble stayed behind them. Silas and me rode south alone after that, through timber, across rain-swollen streams, and down into the open country where the mountains began to loosen their grip. By evening, the sky cleared in strips of gold and gray. Me's face was pale from worry. Her hands gripped the reins too tightly, but she did not slow. Silas watched her from the corner of his eye. He saw the same woman he had known in the letters. The wall, the footing, the one who carried the load even when her heart was breaking under it. At a shallow creek crossing, Juniper stumbled. Me pulled up sharply. "I pushed her too hard," she whispered. Silas dismounted at once and checked the mare's leg. Juniper trembled, tired more than hurt. Silas ran one hand down the animal's muddy cannon bone with careful patience. "She needs a rest," he said. Me shook her head. "We cannot stop. We stopped long enough to keep from losing the horse. My father may not have long." Silas looked up at her. "Then you need to reach him, not break down 10 miles short." The firmness in his voice steadied her because it did not fight her fear. It held it. Me slid from the saddle and nearly fell when her boots hit the ground. Silas caught her by the elbow. For one breath they stood close beside the creek, his hand warm through her sleeve, her face turned toward his chest because she could not bear him seeing her fear spill over. "I left him," she said. "You rode to tell the truth." "I left him. He told you to go." Her eyes lifted to his. "You do not know that." "I know fathers," Silas said quietly. "A good one does not send his daughter toward truth and then blame her for the road." Me's mouth trembled. She turned away before tears could take her strength. They rested the horses only a short while. Silas shared the last of his coffee from a tin flask. Me could barely swallow. When they mounted again, twilight had settled purple over the grassland. They rode into the night. The moon rose late, thin and pale. Coyotes cried somewhere beyond the draws. The horses' breath smoked in the cold air. Once Me started to sway in the saddle and Silas reached across to steady her without a word. Near dawn, the Whitaker ranch came into view. Smoke rose from the chimney. A lantern burned in the front window, though daylight was coming. The sight of it nearly stopped Me's heart. Ranch houses did not keep lanterns burning at dawn unless someone inside was waiting, praying, or leaving. She kicked Juniper forward. Lily came out onto the porch before Me reached the yard. Her hair was loose, her face tired, and her shawl was wrapped crooked around her shoulders. Me swung down before Juniper had fully stopped. "Is he alive?" Lily nodded quickly, tears filling her eyes. "Yes, he has been asking for you." Me covered her mouth once, then ran inside. Silas remained in the yard for a moment, holding both horses. He looked at the house, the weathered porch, the barn, the place he had known only through ink and longing. Then Lily stepped down from the porch and came toward him. "You are Silas Boone," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "I am Lily." He nodded once. "I figured." Her tired face tried for a smile and failed. "I suppose you have reason to dislike me." Silas looked toward the door where Me had vanished. "I have reason to dislike what happened. That is kinder than I deserve. It is all I know how to say right now." Lily accepted that with a small nod. "She wrote you, but she lived us too. I did not understand until too late how much of herself she had put in those letters." Silas said nothing. Lily looked toward the barn. "If you stay, people will talk." "I reckon they already do. They will say she tricked you." Silas's eyes returned to the house. "Then I will tell them she told the truth when it cost her more." Inside, Me knelt beside her father's bed. Thomas Whitaker looked smaller than he had when she left. His face was gray with exhaustion and his breathing came shallow, but his eyes opened when she took his hand. "Me," he whispered. "I am here, Papa." "You told him." Her tears fell then. There was no holding them back. "Yes. All of it. All of it." Thomas's fingers tightened weakly around hers. "Good girl. I am sorry I left." "No," his voice was faint but firm. "I sent you." She bowed her head over his hand. For a while there was only the sound of his breathing and her quiet crying. Her mother stood near the window, one hand pressed to her apron. Lily came in silently and stood by the door. A few moments later, Silas entered too, removing his hat as if stepping into a church. Thomas saw him. Me looked back, startled. Silas stood still, respectful and uncertain. Thomas studied him for a long moment. "Mountain man," Yes, sir. You came with her. Yes, sir. Still angry. Silas did not pretend, some. Thomas nodded faintly. Good, means you cared honest. A weak smile touched his mouth, then faded. Me wiped her cheeks, Papa rest. But Thomas kept looking at Silas. She writes true. Silas's throat moved. I know. She works true too. I know that as well. Thomas closed his eyes, gathering strength. Then do not let the wrong name blind you to the right woman. The room went very still. Me could not breathe. Silas looked at her and something in his face broke open. Not fully, not easily, but enough for love to show through the hurt. I am trying not to, he said. Thomas seemed satisfied by that. The next days passed slowly. Thomas did not die that morning, nor the next. The doctor came, shook his head with grave caution, and said the old man had been spared by a narrow mercy, but he needed rest and no more worries laid across his chest. No more worries was almost a joke on the Whitaker ranch. Debts still waited. Amos's ugly story had already reached 2 ears in Duck Creek, though Hattie Bell reached 4 more with the truth before the lie could put on boots. Lily, to her credit, stood in the store herself and said plainly that the letters had been Me's. The foolishness had begun in her own careless hand, and any person wanting to laugh at her sister could begin by laughing at her first. Most did not. People will forgive a romance before they forgive pride, and Me had shown too little pride in confessing to leave much sport in mocking her. Amos Bell left the valley within a week, owing more apologies than he gave. His 2 companions were fined for attempted theft and sent away from Duck Creek under the deputy's eye. Justice came not with gunfire or revenge, but with truth repeated by enough steady voices until the crooked version had nowhere to stand. Silas stayed at the ranch through it all, not as a husband, not yet, not even as a promised man. He stayed because fences needed mending, Thomas needed quiet, and Me needed someone who understood the weight she carried without trying to lift it from her hands like she was weak. At first, they spoke carefully. In the barn, Me showed him where the winter hay was short. At the kitchen table, Silas helped with figures, slow but determined, while Me watched the man who had once struggled to read now sounding out contracts with a pencil in his hand and a frown of concentration. One evening she found him alone in the parlor with the old family Bible open before him. I am not prying, he said quickly. I know. He touched the page. Your name is written here. Me stepped closer. Me Elizabeth Whitaker, her true name placed there by her mother's careful hand the day she was born. Silas looked at it for a long moment. I like seeing it written where it belongs, he said. Me's eyes softened. So do I. After that, the silence between them changed again. It became less like a wall and more like land being left fallow so something honest might grow. Weeks passed. Thomas strengthened enough to sit on the porch in the afternoons. Lily married Warren Pike before winter, in a small-town ceremony with blue ribbon in her hair and tears in her eyes when Me hugged her. Before leaving, Lily pressed the old photograph into Me's hand. I do not want this following either of us anymore, she said. Me looked at the pretty face in the picture, the face that had stood between her and the man she loved. Then she gave it to Silas. He did not burn it. He placed it inside a drawer at the ranch desk with a note in his careful hand. This was the face of the lie. It is kept only to remember why truth matters. By late autumn, Silas returned to Widow Creek to prepare his cabin for winter. Me stood with him beside the corral on the morning he left. Frost silvered the rails. Juniper and his bay horse stood saddled nearby. Neither of them pretended the parting was easy. Will you write? Me asked. Silas looked at her. Only if you sign first. For one breath she stared at him, then she understood. A small smile touched her mouth through the ache. Fair. He reached into his coat and drew out a folded sheet. Her first true sentence was copied there in his hand. Beneath it he had written one of his own. My name is Silas Boone, and I loved the woman in the letters before I knew how to forgive the lie around them. Me pressed the page to her heart. I will write, she whispered. He nodded, but his eyes held more than farewell. All winter the letters traveled again. This time everyone began honestly. Dear Silas, dear Me. The words were slower now, deeper. They did not rush toward marriage as if love could outrun hurt. Me wrote about her father's improving health, Lily's new life in town, the ranch accounts, and the way she sometimes still feared she had ruined something too precious to repair. Silas wrote about snow against the cabin walls, about the east window, about learning to trust a name one letter at a time. In February, he sent a small pine box with a glass front. It was empty. A note lay inside. For the letters we have not spoiled. Me cried when she read it. By spring, Thomas could walk to the barn with a cane. The ranch debts had eased after a good cattle sale and careful help from Warren, who turned out to be more useful than me had expected from a man with polished boots. The house breathed again. Then on the first warm day of May, Silas rode into the Whitaker yard. Me was in the corral working with a young horse. Dust rose around her boots, her sleeves were rolled, a loose strand of hair clung to her cheek. She turned at the sound of hooves and saw him by the gate. No photograph could have held that moment. Silas dismounted, opened the gate, and stepped inside. The young horse shifted, but me barely noticed. Silas stopped a few feet from her. In his hand was a letter, folded but unsealed. "I thought this one should be read with a face," he said. Her breath caught. He handed it to her. Me opened the page. "Dear Mae Whitaker," it began, "I have loved you in ink, in anger, in truth, and in time. If you can bear the high country, and if you can bear a man who needed a season to forgive what his heart already knew, I am asking plain. Will you marry me under your own name?" Me looked up through tears. Silas stood before her, not as the lonely mountain man from a newspaper notice, not as the wounded man at the cabin door, but as the man who had waited long enough for love to become honest. "Yes," she said. No borrowed name. No hidden hand. No photograph between them, just yes. They married in June at the Whitaker ranch, beneath cottonwoods moving softly in the wind. Thomas sat in a chair near the front, dressed in his best coat, proud and tired and alive. Lily stood beside me in the same blue dress from the old photograph, crying so hard Warren had to lend her a handkerchief. Hattie Bell came from Duck Creek and declared the cake slightly better than Lily's biscuits, which everyone agreed was high praise. Silas spoke his vows slowly, clearly, and in his own hand he had written them first. Me signed the marriage record with a steady pen. Me Elizabeth Whitaker. Then beneath it, for the first time, me Elizabeth Boone. The next morning, she and Silas rode north together. Not because she was leaving her family behind, but because love had made the road wider. She would return with the seasons, keep the ranch books, help her father, visit Lily, and build a life in the high country where the east window caught the morning sun. In Silas's cabin, the old glass front box still held the 50 letters and the first true sentence. Beside it hung the new empty box, waiting for honest pages. Years later, when their children asked why there were 2 boxes by the window, me would smile and touch the old one first. "That one," she would say, "holds the truth we found late." Then Silas would touch the second, "And that one holds the truth we chose on purpose." If this story stayed with your heart, like the kind of letter a person keeps in a drawer, subscribe for more romantic Wild West stories where love, pain, and honesty meet on the frontier. The final letter in the old box was not from the courtship. It was written many years later, after Thomas had passed peacefully, after Lily had children of her own, after the Whitaker ranch and the mountain cabin had both become home. Silas wrote it on a quiet morning while me stood outside feeding chickens, her hair silver at the temples, her hands still rough and dear to him. "Dear me," he wrote, "I once thought a name was the thing that told me who a woman was. Then you gave me 50 letters with the wrong name and a truer heart than I had ever known. I will not say the lie did not hurt. It did. But I have lived long enough beside you to know this. A false name brought your words to my door. Your courage brought you there after them. And your truth kept you." He signed it simply. "Your Silas." Me framed that letter beneath the east window, and every morning when sunlight touched the glass, it shone first on the old pages, then on the new ones, as if even the mountain understood what they had learned. Say the true thing. Sign your own name. Love can survive weather, distance, and fear, but it cannot live forever in hiding. And when Mae Boone looked at her husband across that warm cabin in the high Montana light, she knew the lie had ended at his door, but their real story had begun the moment she finally told the truth.